happy Easter, happy Passover, happy Ramadan, whatever you celebrate. I hope you are enjoying your holiday and enjoying the beautiful weather today. As I had promised, I'm going to be going over the multiple choice section of the exam. I'm not going to be going over questions that just about everybody got correct, except if I feel that it could use a little bit more explanation to make sure everybody really understands it. And I did give you feedback on all of the short answers. If you're one of the few people that asked for an extension on the exam, please turn off the announcement now. As I had told you, we're on the honor system for you not watching this until you've completed the exam. So let's get started. So, full-time placement in regular education classrooms. Most of you answered this correctly, but I just wanted to really hit home that under IDEA, this is always the first placement that should be considered. So you look at what specialized instruction and related services a child might need, what supports they would need in a general ed classroom to be successful to access their education. And only if you can't design it that way should you design supports outside of general education. Which of the following continuum of services options for students with learning disabilities is in correct ascending order? Most of you did get that right, and it's related to that last one. Always the regular ed classroom should be considered first. So in most states, when a teacher initially experiences a child who is experiencing learning or behavior difficulties and they're not already receiving special ed, the first step is, and this was split, so half of you had the correct answer, which is develop and implement interventions. In some states, this is called RTI, response to intervention. In Connecticut, where I do my work, it's called scientifically research-based instruction. But there should always be interventions through general ed that are tried and data collected before a child is evaluated for special education. All that being said, there are some times where I refer to it as the do not pass go, do not collect $200, and you go right to a referral for special education. This happens often with a very young child that may have a significant disability, or there's something that's just very apparent that the child is likely to have a disability, and that going through response to intervention would not yield any additional data. But that is the exception, not the rule. So the least restrictive environment for any given student receiving special education is the answer to that. And most people did get it right, but it can be both regular ed and special ed. And it can change over time, but it needs to be the closest to a regular ed setting while meeting the child's special education needs. So think of it as a continuum. And you start with the least restrictive and you work your way through, but the child should always be placed in a setting that is the closest to a general education, a regular setting with appropriate supports and services, and then add on more restrictive as the child requires it to access their education. Let's see. Many of these lots of you got correct, so that's great. Little bit mixed. Section 504. Many of you responded all the above for that. One thing to know that 504 is not federally funded. 504 is a civil rights law. There is no funding attached to it. Any entity that takes any kind of federal funding is required to provide accommodations if a person is considered to have a disability that impacts a major life function. So for schools, if they're considered to have a disability and it impacts learning, it impacts walking, it impacts breathing, then they'd be under 504, but there is no federal funding for that. A 504 plan is automatically developed if a student doesn't qualify for an IEP, and the answer to that is false. Remember that 504s are not consolations for not being eligible for an IEP. You need to meet that test of being considered to have a disability and requiring accommodation and requiring accommodations as a result of the disability that impacts a major life function. So if the disability doesn't impact a major life function, not a 504. If the person is having difficulty in school, but they don't have a disability, again, not a 504. Members of the deaf community use both American Sign Language and view themselves as a minority group similar to a racial and ethnic group. It's considered, deaf culture is considered as a culture. Students with hearing loss benefit from specially designed assistive technology that includes all of the following. Many of you answered FM system. An FM system, and it was mentioned actually in our chat this week, an FM system is when a teacher is wearing a microphone and a student has either directly through their hearing aids or they have on headphones, and they're able to have sort of the teacher's voice piped right into their ears. That's also used for students that have attention issues too, as well as hearing issues. So FM system is an assistive technology. The vast majority of children with speech and language impairments are served in, and it's actually the correct answer to that is the regular ed classroom. Go back to the very first thing I said. We always have to start with the general ed environment with appropriate supports and services. And many of you said a co-teaching model with an SLP, a speech and language pathologist, and a classroom teacher. That's a great model. It's also an expensive model and not available to every school district. They don't have the resources. So while co-teaching is fabulous, at most times, students with speech and language impairments are just in a regular ed classroom. So this is one of the questions that quite a few of you got this one incorrectly. The process of a manifestation determination. So a manifestation determination is when a student has some sort of behavioral issue. There's a behavioral complaint or infraction. They're being disciplined. And then a team decides if whatever the infraction was a manifestation of their disability. And the correct answer to that is it's a protection for students with social and emotional difficulties for being unfairly disciplined. So I hope that clarifies. Please let me know if you have any other questions about manifestation determinations. We don't see a whole lot of them with really young children, fortunately. Stuttering or disfluency is a communication disorder that may not qualify under IDEA unless there's an impact on a student's accessing their education or their educational performance. That doesn't mean just academics. It could mean that they're having difficulty relating to their peers and other things in the social and emotional realm. But just because you have disfluency does not necessarily mean that you would be qualified for special ed. Because remember, special ed is you have a disability, which disfluency is a communication disorder, and then you need to require specialized instruction, and it has to have an impact on accessing education. So it may not meet all of those criteria. Okay, and the difference between accommodations and modifications. I think for the most part, you guys are doing a really good job with understanding the difference between accommodations and modifications. Remember, accommodations change the how and modifications change the what. So the how is how something is being delivered. Does the student need to be seated away from distractions? Do they need some extra time on tests? Whereas a modification really does change what a student is being taught. They're given simplified questions. They're given a lower grade level reading text. So remember the how for accommodations, the what for modifications. So I'm going to pause for just 1 second and I will go over week 4. Hold on 1 sec.